Frank Delgado stands at his kitchen counter in Tucson, Arizona, sorting a week's worth of pill bottles into a plastic organizer, the way he's done every Sunday night for the last 6 years. He's 71, a retired postal carrier, and the counter is covered with the quiet paperwork of a fixed income. A coffee mug going cold, a stack of unopened mail, and underneath it, the pharmacy receipt he's been avoiding all week. Outside, the evening is settling into that particular Arizona quiet, the kind where the loudest thing in the house is the hum of the refrigerator. He's done this math before, more times than he'd like to admit, and it never gets easier. Last January, that same errand cost him $410 for a 90-day supply of his blood thinner and his diabetes medication combined. He remembers standing at the register, doing math in his head, wondering which bill he'd move to next month to cover it. This January, he ran the same prescriptions through the same plan. The total on the receipt was $62. Frank isn't a real person. He's a composite we've built to walk you through what's actually changing. But the numbers behind his story are not fiction, and neither is the gap between what most seniors think Medicare covers in 2026 and what it actually covers now. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. The reason Frank's bill dropped isn't luck, and it isn't a fluke of his particular pharmacy. It's a set of federal changes that quietly finished phasing in this year. Changes most people miss because their plan renews automatically every December without a second glance. We call that quiet, costly habit the autopilot tax, the money you leave on the table simply because nobody told you. Your coverage got better, and you never bothered to check. And here's the ironic part. For years, the assumption drilled into every retiree's head was that Medicare only gets more expensive, more confusing, and more restrictive with each passing year. In 2026, for the first time in a long time, that assumption is simply wrong. The trap isn't a hidden fee or predatory salesperson. The trap is inertia, the same auto-renewal convenience that's supposed to protect you from lapsing coverage is exactly what keeps thousands of seniors locked into outdated, more expensive versions of their own plan. I'm Jordan, and this channel exists for one reason: to translate the fine print of retirement and elder financial protection into plain English, without the jargon and without the sales pitch. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing, because we publish videos like this one every week. Before we go further, I want to be direct with you. Everything in this video is general education based on publicly available Medicare program updates. It is not personalized legal, tax, or medical advice, and it isn't a substitute for talking with a licensed Medicare counselor, a financial advisor, or your own doctor about your specific situation. Medicare rules can vary based on your plan, your state, and your individual coverage. So treat this as a starting point for your own homework, not a final answer. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. Medicare is a federal program, but it's delivered through thousands of individual private plans, each with its own formulary, its own premium, and its own way of applying these new rules. Two neighbors on the same street with the same diagnosis can be enrolled in plans that behave completely differently. So while the changes we're about to walk through are real and apply nationwide, exactly how much they save you depends entirely on the plan sitting in your mailbox right now, which is precisely why the second half of this video focuses on how to check your own numbers, not just take our word for it. Let's get into the 3 surprises, because understanding the mechanism behind each one is what actually lets you use it. The first surprise is the prescription drug spending cap. For decades, Medicare Part D had a strange and frustrating structure. You paid your deductible, then you paid a share of your drug costs, then you fell into what everyone nicknamed the donut hole, a coverage gap where your costs jumped. And even after you climbed out of that gap into what's called catastrophic coverage, you still owed roughly 5% of your drug costs, with no ceiling. If you were on expensive medications, that 5% could still add up to thousands of dollars a year, forever, with no finish line. Starting in 2025, federal law eliminated the donut hole entirely and introduced a hard annual cap on what you pay out of pocket for covered Part D drugs. For 2026, that cap sits at $2,100. Once your out-of-pocket spending on covered prescriptions hits that number in a calendar year, your covered medications cost you nothing for the rest of the year, not 5%. Zero. This applies whether you have a standalone Part D plan or drug coverage bundled into a Medicare Advantage plan, and you don't have to apply for it or sign up. The plan tracks your spending automatically. The second surprise involves the actual price of the drugs themselves, not just how much of that price you're responsible for. For the first time in the program's history, Medicare negotiated directly with drug manufacturers on a select group of common, high-cost medications, the kind many seniors already take for conditions like diabetes, blood clots, and heart failure. Those negotiated prices took effect at the start of 2026. Independent analysis has found that cost sharing on these specific medications has dropped by roughly half, on average, compared to the year before in several high enrollment states. Alongside that, 2 other pieces of the puzzle stayed in place this year. Recommended vaccines under Part D continue to be covered with no cost to you, and insulin products covered under Medicare remain capped at $35 per month, no matter what pharmacy you use or what deductible phase you're in. None of this requires a special enrollment or a phone call to prove you qualify. It's built into the plan structure itself, but only if your plan actually covers the specific drug you take, which is why checking your plan's list of covered medications, called the formulary, still matters. The third surprise is about flexibility and predictability more broadly. If you're on a Medicare Advantage plan, the maximum amount you can be required to pay out of pocket for covered hospital and medical costs in a year actually went down slightly for 2026 rather than up, which reverses a trend of years where that ceiling kept climbing. And if you take medications that are expensive early in the year, say a specialty drug you fill in January that could otherwise wipe out your budget in one trip to the pharmacy, Medicare's payment plan option lets you spread your out-of-pocket drug costs into smaller monthly installments across the year instead of paying it all up front. That's not new money, and it's not forgiveness of what you owe, but it's a cash flow tool that didn't exist a few years ago. And it's worth knowing it's there before a big prescription catches your budget off guard. Now, none of this means Medicare got cheaper across the board. Part B premiums, for example, did rise again this year, as they typically do, and if your income crosses certain thresholds, you'll still pay an income-related surcharge on top of the standard premium. The point isn't that everything about Medicare improved. The point is that these three specific changes are real, they're already in effect, and a meaningful number of seniors are still paying 2024-era prices for a 2026 benefit, simply because their plan auto-renewed and nobody flagged the difference. To show you why this matters in real dollars, let's walk through three illustrative scenarios. Not real individuals, just examples built to show how the same prescription list plays out differently depending on the choices made. Scenario 1, a retiree in Ohio on a fixed income, taking a blood thinner and a cholesterol medication, who has stayed on the exact same Part D plan for 4 years, without ever comparing it during open enrollment. In this illustrative example, because her plan's formulary hasn't been reviewed, one of her medications recently moved to a higher cost tier, and she's paying close to $300 a month out of pocket, well before hitting the new out-of-pocket cap, because her particular plan's cost-sharing structure for that tier is steep. Scenario 2, a retiree in Florida with a similar prescription list, who reviewed his annual notice of change letter last September and switched to a plan where those same medications sit on a lower cost tier. In this example, his monthly out-of-pocket cost lands closer to $90, and because his total annual drug spending is projected to cross the $2,100 threshold by autumn, he knows in advance that his last few months of the year will cost him nothing for those particular prescriptions. Scenario 3, a retiree in Arizona, closer to Frank's situation, who takes one of the medications now subject to negotiated pricing, uses insulin, and enrolled in the monthly payment plan option to spread his costs evenly. In this illustrative case, his total annual drug spending is lower than either of the other two examples, not because his health needs are different, but because three separate 2026 changes are stacking together in his favor. The negotiated price on his blood thinner, the $35 insulin cap, and the spread-out payment schedule that keeps any single month from spiking. 3 people, similar prescriptions, meaningfully different bills, and the difference has almost nothing to do with luck, and almost everything to do with 5 minutes of paperwork each September. What's striking about these 3 examples isn't just the dollar gap. It's how invisible that gap is until someone actually lays it out side by side. Each of these illustrative retirees would tell you, if you asked, that they're on Medicare and assume their coverage works roughly the same way as their neighbors. In practice, 2 plans covering the identical medication can land on completely different cost tiers, different deductibles, and different premium structures, even within the same city. That variation existed before 2026, but this year it matters even more, because the size of the potential savings from checking is larger than it's been in years. So what should you actually do with this information? Here are a few legitimate, commonly recommended steps. And to be clear, this is general education. For anything specific to your own plan or health situation, a licensed Medicare counselor or your state health insurance assistance program can walk through your exact numbers with you at no cost. First, open your annual notice of change letter every single year, even if you plan to stay with the same plan. This is the single most overlooked document in Medicare paperwork, and it's the one place your plan is required to tell you what's changing about your coverage, your formulary, and your costs for the coming year. Second, use the Medicare Plan Finder tool to compare your current plan against alternatives during open enrollment. It takes your actual medication list and shows you an estimated annual cost across different plans side by side, which is exactly how the retiree in our second scenario found a lower cost tier for the same drugs she'd been overpaying for. Third, if you or a loved one takes an expensive medication early in the year, ask about the Medicare prescription payment plan option before you need it. not after a surprise bill arrives. It won't lower what you owe, but it can prevent a single prescription from derailing a month's budget. Fourth, if insulin or vaccines are part of your regimen, don't assume your specific plan applies these protections correctly. Mistakes and billing errors happen. Confirm directly with your pharmacy or your plan that the $35 cap and no-cost vaccine coverage are reflected on your actual statement. Fifth, if you're helping an aging parent or a spouse manage their coverage, consider setting a recurring reminder for late September when these annual notice letters typically arrive. It's an easy document to lose in a stack of other mail, and it's often the only place a coverage change is disclosed before it shows up as a surprise at the pharmacy counter 3 months later. And sixth, if your household includes someone managing several chronic conditions with multiple prescriptions, it may be worth a conversation with a licensed financial advisor about how predictable prescription costs factor into a broader retirement income plan. Knowing your worst-case annual drug spending is now a capped number can change how much you need to set aside in an emergency fund versus how much you can allocate elsewhere. But that's a conversation for a professional who knows your full financial picture, not a determination to make from a video alone. None of these 6 steps require special expertise, a lawyer, or a fee. They require roughly the same amount of time it takes to read this paragraph, applied once a year, in September, before your plan locks in for the next 12 months. Let's close with the math. Family A does nothing. They let their plan auto-renew, never open the notice of change letter, and never compare their options. In this illustrative example, they spend around $3,600 out of pocket on prescriptions across the year, largely because their medications sit on a costlier tier they never noticed had changed. Family B spends roughly 20 minutes in September reviewing their letter, running their medications through the Plan Finder tool, and confirming their insulin and vaccine coverage. In this illustrative example, their identical prescription list costs them around $1,100 for the year, once the out-of-pocket cap and negotiated pricing are factored in. Same health conditions, same medications, a $2,500 difference built entirely on 5 minutes of paperwork most people skip. Here's the one thing to remember. Medicare actually got better for a lot of seniors in 2026, but that improvement only shows up on your bill if you take 5 minutes each fall to check it. If you know someone on a fixed income who's still gritting their teeth every time they walk up to the pharmacy counter, a parent, a neighbor, an aunt who's never once opened that notice of change letter, send them this video. It might be the most useful 5 minutes you share with them all year.